The telegram arrived in Malad City, Idaho, on a blistering August morning in 1884, carried by a rider whose horse had nearly collapsed from the journey, and it read simply, "Woman fleeing east, stop, husband dangerous, stop, warn authorities, stop." Sarah Nichols had no idea the telegram existed when she stumbled into the mountain pass 3 miles outside town, her dress torn, her feet bleeding through her worn leather boots, and her lungs burning with each desperate breath. She had been running for 6 days straight, stopping only when exhaustion forced her to collapse beneath whatever shelter she could find. The Idaho mountains rose around her like silent sentinels, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in the summer heat. And she had never felt so small, so terrified, so utterly alone in her entire 22 years of life. Behind her, somewhere in the distance, Marcus was hunting. She knew it as surely as she knew her own heartbeat. Marcus Dalton did not let go of what he considered his property, and he had made it abundantly clear over their 3 years of marriage that she belonged to him the same way his cattle and his land and his guns belonged to him. The bruises on her ribs testified to what happened when his property disappointed him. The path ahead narrowed between 2 massive pine trees, their branches creating a cathedral of shadows that offered blessed relief from the scorching sun. Sarah pressed forward, her vision swimming, her empty stomach cramping. She had eaten nothing but wild berries and creek water for 2 days, and even those meager provisions had run out yesterday. The world tilted sideways, and she grabbed at a tree trunk to steady herself, her palms scraping against rough bark. That was when she heard it, the sound of an axe biting into wood, steady and rhythmic, echoing through the mountain silence. Terror and hope warred in her chest. People meant potential help, but people also meant questions, and questions meant explanations, and explanations meant revealing that she was a married woman running from her lawful husband. In 1884, that was a scandal that could get her dragged right back to Marcus, legal system, and moral righteousness on his side. But she was dying out here. She knew it with the certainty of someone who had pushed her body past all reasonable limits. If she did not find help soon, the mountains would claim her, and Marcus would win even in her death. Sarah forced herself forward, following the sound of the axe. She rounded a bend in the trail and stopped, her breath catching for an entirely different reason. The man was massive. That was her first coherent thought. He stood beside a half-built cabin, his back to her, and even from a distance she could see the play of muscle beneath his linen shirt as he swung the axe with practiced precision. His hair fell past his shoulders, dark as midnight, and his shoulders were broad enough to block out the sun. He wore simple clothes, canvas trousers and heavy boots, but everything about him spoke of raw strength and capability. As if sensing her presence, he turned, and Sarah found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen. His face was weathered and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of dark stubble, and a scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline. He had to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, and the way he held the axe, casual and confident, suggested he knew exactly how to use it for purposes beyond splitting wood. They stared at each other for a long moment. Sarah swayed on her feet, and his eyes narrowed, taking in her appearance with a sharp intelligence that missed nothing. "Madam?" His voice was deep, rough from disuse, but not unkind. "You look like you have been through hell itself." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, to offer some explanation that would make sense, but the world chose that moment to dissolve into darkness. She felt herself falling, heard him shout something, and then there was only blessed unconsciousness. When awareness returned, she was lying on something soft. Not a bed exactly, but a pile of furs and blankets that smelled of wood smoke and pine and something distinctly masculine. A fire crackled nearby, and the light that filtered through her closed eyelids was golden and warm. "Easy now." That same deep voice, closer now, gentler. "You are safe. Nobody's going to hurt you here." Sarah's eyes flew open, panic surging through her veins. She tried to sit up, but a large hand pressed gently against her shoulder, keeping her still without force. "I said easy." The mountain man crouched beside her makeshift bed, and up close he was even more imposing. His arms, bare now with his sleeves rolled up, were were corded with muscle and marked with old scars. But his eyes were kind, and his touch was careful. "You have been out for near about 3 hours. I got some water in you and some broth. You were half-starved and all the way to dead from exhaustion." Sarah's throat was dry despite his ministrations. "Where am I?" "My cabin." "Well, what is going to be my cabin once I finish building it?" He gestured around them, and Sarah realized they were inside a structure with walls but no proper roof yet, just canvas stretched over wooden beams. "Name is Xander Prescott. I have been living up here in these mountains for going on 4 years now. I need to keep moving." Sarah tried again to sit up, and this time he let her, though his hand hovered nearby as if ready to catch her if she fell. "He will find me. He will not stop until he finds me." Xander's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "The husband," Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I have seen that look before. Fear like yours. It comes from something specific. And a woman alone in the mountains, running herself to death?" He sat back on his heels, studying her face. "Did not take much figuring. Does he have a habit of using his fists on you?" The blunt question should have shocked her, but instead, Sarah felt something inside her crack open. Tears burned her eyes, and she nodded, unable to speak. Xander's hands curled into fists, the knuckles going white. "Well, he's not getting anywhere near you, not while you are under my protection." "You do not understand." Sarah's voice came out rough and desperate. "Marcus Dalton is not just any man. He owns half of Wyoming, has the law in his pocket, and he considers me his property. If he finds me here with you, he will kill you without a second thought, and then he will take me back. You should send me away, send me to town, send me anywhere but here." "I am not sending you anywhere." Xander rose to his feet in one fluid motion, moving to tend the fire. "And I would like to see this Marcus Dalton try to take you from me. These mountains have a way of humbling men who think their money and their influence mean something up here." Despite everything, despite the fear and the exhaustion and the certainty that she was bringing disaster down on this stranger's head, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." Xander turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Because I know what it is to run. I know what it is to need a place to hide, to heal, and because no woman should have to live in fear of the man who swore to protect her." He moved to a rough wooden box in the corner and pulled out a bundle of cloth. "Here. These were my sisters. She passed through here last spring on her way to California with her husband. Left some things behind. They will fit you better than those rags." Sarah took the offered clothes, her fingers trembling. "I do not know how to thank you." "Then do not." Xander moved toward the canvas doorway. "Get yourself changed and rested. There's more broth in the pot when you are ready for it. I will be outside working on the roof. You holler if you need anything." He ducked through the opening and was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the crackling fire. She looked down at the clothes in her lap, simple but well made, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. For the first time in 3 years, someone had offered her kindness without expecting anything in return. The sun was setting by the time Sarah emerged from the cabin, dressed in a simple cotton blouse and split skirt that fit her reasonably well. Her own dress she had washed as best she could in a bucket of water Xander had left for her, and it now hung from a rope line strung between 2 trees. She felt almost human again, though her body still ached and her feet were tender from the days of running. Xander was working on the roof, balanced on the wooden beams with the sure-footedness of a mountain cat. He had removed his shirt in the heat, and Sarah found herself staring at the expanse of his back, at the muscles that moved beneath sun-bronzed skin, at the obvious strength contained in his frame. He was nothing like Marcus, who was soft and cruel, who used his power to hurt rather than build. As if sensing her gaze, Xander looked down and caught her watching. To her embarrassment, she felt heat rise in her cheeks, but he just offered a small nod. "Feeling better?" "Much. Thank you." Sarah moved closer, craning her neck to see his progress. "This is beautiful work. Keeps my hands busy." Xander climbed down with easy grace, landing lightly beside her. He retrieved his shirt from where it hung on a branch and shrugged it on, though he did not bother with the buttons. "Been planning this cabin for 2 years. Finally got started on it this spring." "You live alone up here?" Sarah asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course he lived alone, that much was obvious. But Xander did not seem to mind the question. Mostly. I head into Malad City once a month or so for supplies, trade some furs and meat. But yes, I prefer the solitude. People and we do not always see eye to eye. I can understand that. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was still warm. I thought I wanted people around me. A husband, a family, a place in society. Now I think solitude might be the greatest gift a person could ask for. Xander's expression softened. He took that from you, did he? The joy in being around others? He took a lot of things from me. Sarah was surprised to find herself speaking so freely, but something about Xander's quiet presence made the words flow easier. My family, my friends, my sense of safety. He was charming when we met, handsome, wealthy, respected. My father thought it was a perfect match. I was 19 and foolish enough to believe in romance. And when did he first hit you? Xander asked quietly. 3 weeks after the wedding. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I burned the roast, such a small thing. He backhanded me across the face and told me I needed to learn my place. It only got worse from there. Xander was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with controlled anger. A man who raises his hand to a woman is not a man at all. He's a coward and a bully, and he deserves whatever consequences find him. The law will not see it that way. Sarah looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to appear. I am his wife. By law, I am his to do with as he pleases. Then the law is wrong. Xander's certainty was absolute, and up here, the law does not reach. Up here, there is just right and wrong, survival and death. Your husband wants to find you. He is going to have to go through me, and I promise you, Sarah, that is not going to happen. It was the first time he had used her name, and hearing it from his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. You called me Sarah. I never told you my name. You did, actually. While you were half conscious from the fever, you kept saying it over and over, like you were trying to remind yourself who you were underneath all the hurt. Xander met her eyes, and something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond words. You are Sarah Nichols. You are 22 years old. You like to read poetry and you used to sing in the church choir. And you are not going to let Marcus Dalton define you anymore. Sarah's breath caught. I said all that, and more. A hint of a smile touched Xander's lips. You have a sister named Margaret who lives in Boston. Your favorite color is green, and you make the best apple pie in Wyoming, or so you claimed, though you might have been delirious on that last part. Despite everything, Sarah found herself laughing. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. I do make a good apple pie, that part is true. Well, I have apples, wild ones, but they are decent enough. Maybe when you are feeling stronger, you can prove your claim. Xander's expression grew serious again. But for now you need rest. Real rest, the kind that comes from knowing you are safe. Take the bed. I will sleep outside by the fire. I cannot ask you to do that, Sarah protested. This is your home, and you are my guest. Besides, I have slept under the stars more nights than I can count. One more will not hurt me. Xander's tone brooked no argument. Go on now. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. Sarah wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her again, the brief surge of energy fading. She nodded and retreated into the cabin, and within moments of lying down on the soft furs, she was asleep. The next 3 days passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. Sarah rested and healed, eating the food Xander prepared, and drinking in the mountain air like medicine. He was gentle with her, careful, but not coddling. He gave her space when she needed it, and company when she wanted it, seeming to understand her moods without her having to explain them. She learned that he had been a soldier once, fighting in the Indian Wars, and that what he saw there had driven him to seek solitude in the mountains. He had been married briefly, he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, but his wife had died in childbirth along with their baby daughter. That had been 7 years ago, and he had not been with a woman since. I blamed myself, he said quietly, staring into the flames. Thought if I had been there instead of off fighting, maybe she would have lived. Maybe they both would have. You cannot know that, Sarah said softly. Childbirth is dangerous no matter who is present. My own mother lost 3 babies before me. I know that in my head. Knowing it in my heart, that is the harder part. Xander looked over at her. But being up here, building this place with my own hands, it has helped, given me purpose beyond grief. Sarah understood that. Grief and guilt, they were cousins, both capable of consuming a person whole, if allowed. On the 4th day, Xander announced he needed to check his traps deeper in the mountains and asked if Sarah wanted to come along. She agreed readily, eager to see more of this wild country that had become her refuge. They set out at dawn, Xander carrying his rifle with easy familiarity, and Sarah marveling at the beauty surrounding them. The mountains were alive with summer growth, wildflowers painting the meadows in shades of purple and gold, and eagles soaring overhead. Xander moved through the landscape with a confidence born of years of experience, pointing out animal tracks and edible plants, teaching her the ways of the wilderness without making her feel ignorant. They were checking the 3rd trap when they heard it, the distant sound of horses, multiple riders coming up the main trail. Xander's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her into the cover of nearby trees, pressing a finger to his lips. Together, they crouched in silence, watching as 5 men on horseback came into view on the trail below. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider. Marcus Dalton sat tall in his saddle, his expensive clothes and polished tack looking absurdly out of place in the wild mountains. The men with him were hired guns, she realized, their hard faces and ready weapons marking them as dangerous. That him? Xander breathed in her ear, and Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the fear clogging her throat. They watched in tense silence as the riders paused at a fork in the trail. Marcus said something to his men, and they split up, 3 going one direction and 2, including Marcus, heading the other, toward Xander's cabin. We need to move, Xander said quietly. Come on. He led her deeper into the forest, moving quickly but quietly, his hand still gripping hers. They traveled for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 1, putting distance between themselves and the riders. Finally, Xander stopped in a small clearing beside a rushing creek. We wait here until dark, he said. Then we circle back and see what they have done. Xander, I'm so sorry. Sarah felt tears threatening. I have brought this down on you. I should never have stayed. I should have kept running. And you would be dead within a week. Xander turned to face her, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders gently. Listen to me, Sarah. You did not bring this on anyone. He did. Your husband. He is the one choosing to hunt you like an animal. He is the one choosing violence. You are just trying to survive. But your cabin, your home, can be rebuilt if it needs to be. You cannot. Xander's blue eyes were intense, holding her gaze. I told you I would protect you, and I meant it. Whatever comes, we face it together. The way he said, together, made Sarah's heart skip. She had known this man for less than a week, but somehow he had already become more of a partner to her than Marcus had ever been. There was a strength in Xander that went beyond the physical, a goodness that Marcus's cruelty could never touch. Why are you doing this? She asked, needing to understand. You could tell me to leave. You could turn me over to Tim and avoid all this trouble. Xander was quiet for a moment, his thumbs making small circles on her shoulders through the fabric of her blouse. You want the truth? Please. Because when I saw you that first day, stumbling out of the trees more dead than alive, something in me woke up, something I thought died with my wife and daughter. He took a breath. I have been existing up here, Sarah, surviving, but not really living. You reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. Sarah's breath hitched. Xander, I know it is too soon. I know you are running from one man, and the last thing you need is another one making claims on you. Xander's voice was rough with emotion. But I need you to know, if you will have me, if you can ever trust a man again after what he did to you, I would spend the rest of my days making sure you never felt afraid again. It was perhaps the worst possible timing for such a declaration, hiding in the forest while her vengeful husband hunted her. But somehow it was also perfect. Sarah reached up and laid her palm against Xander's scarred cheek, feeling the rasp of his stubble, the warmth of his skin. I think I started falling for you the moment you caught me when I collapsed, she whispered. I was terrified of what that meant, terrified of feeling anything for a man ever again. But you are nothing like him, Xander, nothing like him at all. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, as if they had been moving toward this moment since the beginning. Xander's lips were gentle on hers, asking rather than demanding, and Sarah melted into him, letting herself feel safe for the first time in years. His arms came around her, strong and protective, and she felt cherished in a way she had never experienced in her marriage. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "We are going to get through this," he promised, "and then I'm going to court you proper. Flowers and pretty words and everything you deserve." "I would like that," Sarah said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They stayed by the creek until the sun set, talking quietly and stealing kisses like teenagers. Xander told her about his plans for the cabin, how he wanted to expand it, add a real floor and glass windows. Sarah found herself imagining living there with him, waking up to mountain sunrises and falling asleep in his arms, and the image filled her with longing. As darkness fell, they made their way carefully back toward the cabin. Xander moved like a ghost through the trees, and Sarah did her best to follow his example. They approached from the north, staying in the cover of the forest, and peered down at Xander's homestead. The canvas roof had been torn down, and the supplies Xander had stored inside were scattered across the clearing. But the structure itself still stood, and there was no sign of the riders. They had searched and moved on. "They will be back," Xander said grimly. "This was just a first pass. Come morning, they will start searching more thoroughly." "Then what do we do?" Xander was silent for a long moment, thinking. Finally he said, "We go to Malad City. Talk to the sheriff. Tell him what is happening. Your husband might have money and influence, but he does not have jurisdiction in Idaho. And Sheriff Tom Brennan, he is a good man, fair. He will not take kindly to some Wyoming rancher bringing hired guns into his territory." It was a risk, Sarah knew. Going to town meant exposing herself, making her presence known, but hiding in the mountains would only work for so long. Eventually, Marcus would find them, and when he did, the confrontation would be bloody. "All right," she agreed. "We go to town." They spent the night hidden in the forest, taking turns keeping watch. When dawn broke, they set out on foot, avoiding the main trails and sticking to the deer path Xander knew by heart. It was a hard journey, several hours of rough terrain, but they made good time. Malad City came into view around mid-morning, a small but growing settlement nestled in a valley. The streets were busy with miners and farmers, freight wagons and horses, the sounds of industry and life. Sarah felt exposed the moment they stepped onto the main street, but Xander kept close to her side, his presence a comfort. The sheriff's office was a modest building near the center of town. Xander pushed open the door and ushered Sarah inside, where a middle-aged man with steel-gray hair and a weathered face looked up from his desk. "Xander Prescott," the sheriff said, surprise evident in his voice. "Did not expect to see you in town for another 2 weeks at least." "Tom." Xander nodded respectfully. "We have a problem, a big one." Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah told her story. She left nothing out, describing Marcus's abuse, her escape, and his current pursuit of her with hired guns. Sheriff Brennan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Well, that's a hell of a situation, pardon my language, madam, but here's the thing. Legally speaking, you are still his wife. If he comes here asking after you, I cannot refuse to tell him where you are." "Even though he means to hurt her?" Xander's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I did not say I liked it. I said that is the law." Brennan held up a hand. "But there are other considerations. For one, if Marcus Dalton brings armed men into my town looking for trouble, that is a threat to public safety. I can deputize folks to help keep the peace. For another, if Mrs. Dalton here were to swear out a complaint about his abuse, that would give me cause to question him, maybe hold him for a bit." "Would it be enough to stop him?" Sarah asked quietly. Brennan's expression was sympathetic. "Honestly, madam, probably not in the long run, but it might buy you some time. Time to figure out your next move." "What if she got a divorce?" Xander asked suddenly. "Would that change things?" "Divorce is difficult and expensive," Brennan said, "and it requires grounds. Abuse might count depending on the judge, but you would need proof." Sarah touched her ribs automatically, where the worst of the bruises had finally started to fade. I have proof. On my body. Scars that will never fully heal. Brennan nodded slowly. That might work. But you would need a lawyer willing to take the case and time to go through the legal process. Months, probably. What about an annulment? Sarah had been thinking about this during the long walk to town. Our marriage was never consummated willingly. He forced himself on me from the beginning. Does that not count for something? The sheriff looked uncomfortable with the intimate details, but nodded. It might. That's a question for a lawyer, though, not a lawman. There's a young attorney who just set up practice here, fellow named Charles Whitman. Good man, from what I've heard. You might talk to him. We will do that, Xander said firmly. But in the meantime, what happens when Dalton shows up here? Because he will. When he does, I will deal with him within the bounds of the law. Brennan stood and extended his hand to Sarah. You have my word, Mrs. Dalton, that while you are in Malad City, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. It was not a guarantee, but it was something. Sarah shook his hand gratefully, and then she and Xander left the sheriff's office to find the lawyer. Charles Whitman was indeed young, probably not more than 30, with earnest eyes and a nervous energy that suggested he was eager to prove himself. He listened to Sarah's story with growing indignation, taking notes on a piece of paper. This is horrible, he said when she finished. Absolutely horrible. I have to tell you, Mrs. Dalton, this will not be an easy case. Divorce and annulment, they are difficult under the best circumstances. When the husband is wealthy and well-connected. He trailed off meaningfully. But it can be done? Sarah pressed. It can be attempted, Whitman corrected. With your testimony and medical evidence of abuse, we might have a chance. The fact that you fled for your life, that will support your case. But we will need to file in Wyoming, where you were married, and that means facing your husband in his home territory. Sarah felt her hope deflating. So there is no way out. I did not say that. Whitman leaned forward. There is another option, though it is somewhat unconventional. If you were to stay here in Idaho for a period of time, establish residency, you could file for divorce here instead. It would take 6 months at minimum, but Idaho has more progressive divorce laws than Wyoming, and your husband's influence would carry less weight here. 6 months, Xander said thoughtfully. Can we keep her safe for 6 months? That would be the challenge, Whitman admitted. But if she had a legal guardian or protector during that time, someone respected in the community who could vouch for her, it would strengthen her case considerably. Xander and Sarah exchanged glances. What kind of guardian? She asked. Well, ideally a family member, but a betrothed would work as well. Someone who could provide for her, protect her, make sure she was not coerced or intimidated. Whitman looked between them, clearly picking up on the connection. If you two were engaged to be married, and if Mr. Prescott were willing to stand as her protector, that would go a long way toward convincing a judge that Mrs. Dalton has legitimate reasons for seeking to end her marriage. Sarah's heart pounded. They had only known each other for a handful of days. An engagement was a serious commitment, even one undertaken for legal protection. But Xander did not hesitate. I would be honored to stand as Sarah's betrothed, he said firmly, and to protect her from anyone who means her harm. Whitman nodded approvingly. Excellent. Then here is what we will do. I will draw up the paperwork for you to establish residency. Miss Nichols. He caught himself. Mrs. Dalton, you will need to find employment or some means of supporting yourself, even with Mr. Prescott's protection. It will show independence and determination. In 6 months, we will file for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and abuse. In the meantime, if your husband shows up causing trouble, we document everything. Every threat, every confrontation, it all builds our case. It was a plan, at least, not a perfect one, but better than running blind through the mountains until Marcus caught her. Thank you, Sarah said sincerely. How much do we owe you? We can discuss payment once the case is resolved, Whitman said with a small smile. For now, let us just say I am doing this because it is the right thing to do. I got into law to help people, and you, Mrs. Dalton, clearly need help. They left the lawyer's office with Sarah feeling more hopeful than she had in weeks. The sun was high overhead, and the town bustled with activity around them. Xander took her hand, his large fingers intertwining with hers, and the simple gesture made her feel grounded. We should find you a place to stay, he said. Somewhere safe with people around. The boarding house on Main Street has a good reputation. What about you? Sarah asked. Where will you stay? I will camp outside town, keep an eye on things. Xander's expression was serious. If your husband and his men are searching the mountains, I need to know where they are, what they are doing, and I need to protect what is left of my cabin. Sarah understood, but the thought of being separated from him, even for a night, filled her with dread. Be careful, she whispered. Always am. Xander lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. 6 months, Sarah. We can survive anything for 6 months, and then you will be free. Free. The word was almost too precious to hope for. The boarding house was run by a stout, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Harriet Fletcher, who took one look at Sarah and seemed to understand immediately that here was a woman in need of sanctuary. She asked no prying questions, just showed Sarah to a small but clean room on the second floor and told her that breakfast was at 7 and dinner at 6. You look like you need a hot bath and a good meal, Mrs. Fletcher said kindly. I will have my daughter bring up some water, and you are welcome to join us for supper this evening. Sarah could have cried from the simple kindness. Thank you. I can pay, though not much right now. We will work something out, Mrs. Fletcher interrupted. I'm always in need of help around here. If you are willing to earn your keep, we can come to an arrangement. And just like that, Sarah had employment and a place to live. It was a fragile foundation, but it was a foundation nonetheless. That evening, as she sat down to dinner with Mrs. Fletcher and her daughter Emma, a sweet girl of 16, Sarah felt almost normal. The food was simple but plentiful, roast chicken and potatoes and fresh bread, and the conversation was light and easy. She learned that Mr. Fletcher had died 5 years ago, leaving his wife to run the boarding house alone, and that Emma was engaged to a young farmer who lived just outside town. When are you and Mr. Prescott getting married? Emma asked with the blunt curiosity of youth. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. We have not set a date yet. Things are complicated. He is a good man, Mrs. Fletcher said firmly. Quiet, keeps to himself, but good. You could do worse. I have done worse, Sarah murmured, then caught herself. But Mrs. Fletcher just nodded knowingly, and Sarah realized that perhaps her story was not as unique as she thought. Perhaps there were other women who had fled bad marriages, who had sought new lives in frontier towns where the past could be left behind. The thought was both comforting and heartbreaking. That night, Sarah lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town outside her window. Somewhere out there, Xander was camping under the stars, watching over her even from a distance. And somewhere else, Marcus was hunting, driven by his obsessive need to possess what he considered his. She touched her lips, remembering Xander's kiss, the gentle strength of his hands. This was what love should feel like, she realized. Not fear and pain, but safety and warmth. Not ownership, but partnership. If she could just survive the next 6 months, she might actually have a chance at happiness. 3 days passed quietly. Sarah fell into a routine at the boarding house, helping Mrs. Fletcher with cooking and cleaning, learning the rhythms of the business. Xander came into town each evening, ostensibly to buy supplies but really to check on her, to steal a few moments of conversation on the boarding house porch while the sun set. They were careful not to be too familiar in public, aware that any hint of impropriety could damage Sarah's legal case, but the connection between them grew stronger with each passing day. On the 4th day, Marcus Dalton rode into Malad City. Sarah was in the boarding house kitchen, up to her elbows in bread dough, when Emma burst through the back door, her face pale. Sarah, there are men here, fancy men on expensive horses. They are asking questions about you at the general store. Fear slammed through Sarah's chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Go find Xander, she said quickly. He should be at the blacksmith's. Tell him Marcus is here. Emma nodded and disappeared, and Sarah wiped her hands on her apron with shaking fingers. She wanted to run, to hide, but she forced herself to stay put. Running would solve nothing. She had to face this. Mrs. Fletcher came into the kitchen, her expression grim. Those men are looking for you. I told them I did not know any Sarah Nichols or Sarah Dalton, but I do not think they believed me. I am sorry, Sarah whispered. I should leave before they bring trouble to your door. You will do no such thing. Mrs. Fletcher's voice was firm. This is my house, and nobody is taking one of my residents against her will. Now, you go upstairs and stay in your room. I will handle this. But before Sarah could move, the front door of the boarding house slammed open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, and then Marcus Dalton appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face red with anger and exertion. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his handsome features twisted into something ugly. Behind him stood two of his hired men, hands resting on their pistols. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice deceptively soft, "did you really think you could run from me?" Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to show the terror coursing through her veins. "I am not running anymore, Marcus. I am leaving. There is a difference. You are my wife. You belong with me, in our home." Marcus took a step forward, and Sarah instinctively stepped back. "This foolishness ends now. You are coming back to Wyoming, and we are going to forget this ever happened." The lady said she is not going anywhere. Mrs. Fletcher moved to stand between them, her considerable bulk blocking Marcus's path. "And this is private property. You have no right to be here." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, old woman. This is between a man and his wife." "Actually, it is not." Sheriff Brennan's voice came from the hallway, and he stepped into the kitchen with his hand on his gun. "Mr. Dalton, I have been hearing reports that you and your men have been harassing the citizens of my town. That stops now." "I am looking for my wife, Sheriff. That is hardly harassment." Marcus's tone was reasonable, controlled, but Sarah could see the rage simmering beneath the surface. "Mrs. Dalton has made it clear she does not wish to go with you," Brennan said calmly. "And she is under the protection of Mr. Xander Prescott, who is a respected member of this community. If you have a legal complaint, you can file it through proper channels, but if you try to take her by force, I will arrest you for kidnapping and assault." "She is my wife!" Marcus roared, his control finally snapping. "Mine! I have every legal right." "You have the right to file for the return of your wife through the courts," Brennan interrupted. "What you do not have is the right to invade private property and terrorize citizens. Now, you and your men can leave peacefully, or I can arrest you. Your choice." For a long, tense moment, the kitchen was silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of Marcus's stare like a physical thing. Then, footsteps on the porch, and Xander appeared in the doorway, his rifle held loosely in his hands. The contrast between the two men was stark. Marcus, soft and overdressed, his anger making him ugly. Xander, solid and calm, radiating a quiet strength that needed no words. "Sarah," Xander said gently, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "You all right?" "I am now," she managed. Xander nodded, then looked at Marcus. "I think you heard the sheriff. Time for you to go." Marcus's face went purple. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man who's going to marry Sarah once her divorce from you is finalized," Xander said calmly. "I am also the man who will put a bullet in you if you so much as look at her wrong. Your choice how this plays out." "You cannot do this!" Marcus lunged forward, but Brennan grabbed his arm, and one of the hired men stepped forward as if to intervene. Xander's rifle came up in a smooth motion, and suddenly the air was thick with the potential for violence. "Enough!" Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. "Dalton, you are coming with me to the office. We are going to have a long talk about jurisdiction and the law. Your men can wait outside. And you," he looked at Xander, "put the rifle down before someone gets hurt." Xander lowered the weapon slowly, and the tension in the room ratcheted down slightly. Marcus jerked his arm free from Brennan's grip, but allowed himself to be escorted toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back to Sarah, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. "This is not over," he said quietly. "You are mine, Sarah. Till death do us part. Remember that." Then he was gone, and Sarah's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Xander had not been there in an instant, catching her, holding her up. "I have got you," he murmured into her hair. "I have got you." Sarah clung to him shaking, and Mrs. Fletcher ushered them both into the parlor while Emma ran to fetch tea. They sat together on the sofa, Xander's arm around her shoulders, and slowly Sarah's breathing returned to normal. "He will not give up," she said eventually. "You saw him. He would rather see me dead than free." "Then we make sure you stay free and alive," Xander said firmly. "Brennan will hold him for a bit, maybe overnight. Give us time to think, to plan." "What if the law is not enough?" Sarah looked up at him. "What if he comes after us in the night, or hire someone to, then I will handle it. Xander's voice was hard. I have killed men before, Sarah, in the war and self-defense. I do not relish it, but I will do whatever it takes to protect you, whatever it takes. Sarah believed him. The question was whether that would be enough. Sheriff Brennan kept Marcus in custody for 2 days on charges of disturbing the peace and trespassing. It was not much, but it bought time. During those 2 days, Xander barely left Sarah's side. He moved into the boarding house, taking a room across the hall from hers, and Mrs. Fletcher turned a blind eye to propriety in favor of safety. At night, Sarah could hear him pacing in his room, keeping watch, and the sound was oddly comforting. On the 3rd day, Charles Whitman arrived at the boarding house with news. Marcus had been released and had immediately filed a writ of habeas corpus, demanding that Sarah be returned to him as his lawful wife. A hearing was scheduled for the following week in the territorial courthouse. This is actually good for us, Whitman explained as they gathered in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor. It forces the issue into the open, gives us a chance to present our case before a judge. If we can show sufficient cause for why Sarah should be allowed to remain in Idaho and pursue a divorce, the judge might grant her temporary protection. And if he does not? Xander asked grimly. Then we appeal. And in the meantime, we pray that the law moves slower than Marcus's patience. Whitman looked apologetic. I know this is not the answer you wanted to hear, but it is the reality of the situation. The week before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Whitman coached Sarah on her testimony, helped her document every injury Marcus had ever inflicted, every cruel word and violent act. It was painful, dredging up those memories, but necessary. Xander stayed close, a silent, steady presence. They took walks together in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, about his time in the Army, about his dreams for the cabin. She told him about her love of books, her strained relationship with her father who had pushed her into the marriage, her hope that someday she might be able to sing again without fear. You will, Xander promised one evening as they sat on a bench outside the general store, watching the sun set over the mountains. When this is over, I want to hear you sing. I want to hear you laugh without looking over your shoulder. I want to see you truly free. What if that day never comes? Sarah whispered. It will. Xander took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Because we are going to make it happen. Together. The hearing took place on a hot August morning in a courtroom packed with curious onlookers. News of the case had spread through town, and it seemed like half of Malad City had turned out to see the drama unfold. Marcus sat on one side of the room with his expensive lawyer, a slick man from Cheyenne who looked like he ate frontier judges for breakfast. Sarah sat on the other side with Whitman and Xander, her hands clenched in her lap. The judge was an older man named Hiram Caldwell, his face weathered and his eyes sharp. He listened as Marcus's lawyer argued that Sarah was legally bound to her husband and that her flight to Idaho was an act of theft, since she had taken property belonging to Marcus when she left. Property, Whitman interjected. She is a human being, Your Honor, not chattel. She is also a wife, Marcus's lawyer shot back, bound by sacred vows and legal contract to her husband. Her duty is to return to the marital home, not to run off with some mountain man and file spurious claims of abuse. Spurious? Whitman stood, his face flushed. I have a medical report here from Dr. Samuel Harris, who examined Mrs. Dalton and found evidence of repeated trauma consistent with physical assault. Broken ribs, scarring, bruises in various stages of healing. This is not spurious, Your Honor. This is attempted murder by increments. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and Judge Caldwell banged his gavel for silence. I will hear from Mrs. Dalton herself. Madam, please take the stand. Sarah's legs shook as she walked to the witness chair, but she forced herself to remain calm. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and then she began to speak. She told the court everything. The first time Marcus hit her, the broken arm he caused when he threw her down the stairs, the night he held a pillow over her face until she nearly passed out, all because she had disagreed with him at a dinner party, the constant fear, the isolation from friends and family, the suffocating sense that she was slowly dying inside that marriage. By the time she finished, there were tears on several faces in the courtroom. Even Judge Caldwell looked grim. Marcus's lawyer stood for cross-examination, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Mrs. Dalton, is it not true that you were unhappy in your marriage because you were unable to provide your husband with children? Sarah stiffened. Is it not true that your husband sought medical advice on your behalf, spent considerable money trying to help you conceive? He blamed me for not getting pregnant, Sarah said quietly, but the violence started long before that became an issue. Or perhaps you invented these claims of abuse to justify your own failings as a wife. The lawyer's voice was sharp now. Perhaps you ran to Idaho with Mr. Prescott because you were engaged in an adulterous affair? That's a lie! Xander was on his feet, his voice booming through the courtroom. I met Sarah less than 2 weeks ago, when she collapsed half dead outside my cabin. Everything she has told this court is the truth. Order! Judge Caldwell banged his gavel again. Mr. Prescott, sit down. Counselor, you will confine yourself to questions, not accusations. The hearing went on for another hour, with witnesses called on both sides. Mrs. Fletcher testified about Sarah's demeanor and the fear she showed when Marcus arrived. Dr. Harris presented his medical findings. Marcus himself took the stand, painting a picture of a devoted husband searching for his troubled, possibly mentally unstable wife. It was sickening to watch him lie so smoothly, so convincingly. Finally, Judge Caldwell called for closing arguments. Marcus's lawyer argued that the sanctity of marriage must be upheld, that Sarah's place was with her lawful husband regardless of her personal feelings. Whitman stood and faced the judge squarely. Your Honor, the question before this court is not about the sanctity of marriage. It is about the sanctity of human life. Sarah Dalton fled Wyoming because she believed, with good reason, that her husband would eventually kill her. She has established residency here in Idaho, has employment, has a protector willing to stand for her. She is not asking this court to dissolve her marriage today. She is simply asking for the time and space to pursue legal remedy through proper channels. To deny her that, to send her back to a man who has proven himself violent and unstable, would be a miscarriage of justice. Judge Caldwell was silent for a long time after the arguments concluded. The courtroom held its collective breath. Finally, he spoke. This is one of the most difficult cases I have heard in my years on the bench. On one hand, the law is clear about the rights of husbands. On the other hand, the evidence of abuse presented here is deeply troubling. Sarah's heart sank. He was going to rule against her. But then Caldwell continued. However, I am persuaded by the medical evidence and by Mrs. Dalton's own testimony that there is sufficient cause to grant her petition for temporary protection. Mrs. Dalton, you are granted 6 months to establish residency in Idaho and to file for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. During that time, Mr. Dalton, you are hereby enjoined from approaching within 100 yards of your wife or from making any attempts to contact her directly or through intermediaries. Violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest. The gavel came down, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was a chance. Marcus stood, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage. She is my wife. And she is also a person with rights under the law, Caldwell said sternly. My ruling stands. This court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Xander pulled Sarah into his arms, holding her tight while she cried against his chest. You did it, he murmured. You are safe. For now, you are safe. Marcus and his men left Malad City that evening, but Sarah knew it was not over. The look he had given her as he rode out of town promised that this was merely a delay, not a defeat. But for the first time in 3 years, Sarah could breathe. The next 6 months passed more quickly than Sarah had thought possible. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, becoming indispensable to Mrs. Fletcher. She made friends in town, attended church socials, slowly rebuilt the parts of herself that Marcus had destroyed. And she fell more deeply in love with Xander with each passing day. He finished his cabin and invited her up to see it, and Sarah had cried at the beauty of it. He had built it, with windows facing east to catch the sunrise, and a wide porch where they could sit together in the evenings. There was a bedroom, a kitchen, a main room with a massive stone fireplace. I built it for you, Xander admitted one evening as they sat on that porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Every board, every nail, I was thinking about you, about us, about the life we could have here. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling completely at peace. I love it. I love everything about it. And me? Xander asked softly. Do you love me too? Sarah turned to look at him, at his scarred, handsome face, at the eyes that had only ever looked at her with kindness. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, she said honestly. You saved my life, Xander, in every way a person can be saved. The kiss they shared was deep and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Xander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I know we are already engaged, technically, he said, his voice rough with emotion, but I want to do this right. Sarah Nichols, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me in these mountains, wake up beside me every morning, and let me spend every day proving that I will cherish you the way you deserve? Inside the box was a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone that matched the color of his eyes. Sarah took it with shaking hands and slipped it onto her finger. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. They were married 3 days after her divorce was finalized, in a small ceremony at the church in Malad City, with Mrs. Fletcher and Emma and Sheriff Brennan as witnesses. Charles Whitman stood as Xander's best man, and Sarah wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her sew. As Xander slipped the ring onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her until death, Sarah felt whole for the first time in years. This was what marriage was supposed to be: partnership, respect, genuine affection. That night, in the cabin Xander had built for them, he made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Every touch was a question, every kiss a reassurance that she was safe, she was loved, she was free. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Xander traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. I was thinking, he said quietly, about what comes next. What do you mean? Sarah asked, drowsy and content. I have been alone up here for a long time, happy enough, or so I thought. But now I cannot imagine going back to that. Cannot imagine a day without you. He propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. I want a family with you, Sarah. Children, if we are blessed with them. A life full of noise and laughter and love. Sarah felt her heart swell. I want that too, all of it. Even knowing it will not be easy, that life up here is hard, isolated sometimes. Especially knowing that, Sarah reached up to cup his cheek, because hard does not mean bad. Isolated does not mean lonely, not when I have you. Xander smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look years younger. Then we have a plan. Build our life, raise our family, and wake up grateful every single day that you stumbled out of those trees and into my world. Best stumble I ever took, Sarah said, and pulled him down for another kiss. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy they named James after Xander's father. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and Xander cried the first time he held him, overcome with the miracle of new life. I thought I would never have this again, he whispered, staring down at his son. Thought that part of my life was over. We get to start over, Sarah said softly, watching her husband and son with a full heart. Both of us. Over the next 5 years, they added 2 more children to their family, a daughter named Margaret after Sarah's sister, and another son they called Thomas. The cabin echoed with laughter and the patter of small feet, and Sarah found herself singing again, filling their home with music. They heard, through occasional letters from Charles Whitman, that Marcus had remarried. His new wife was young and wealthy, and by all accounts just as miserable as Sarah had been. Sarah felt pity for the woman, but also relief. Marcus had moved on, found a new victim to control, and had finally stopped searching for Sarah. She was truly free. Xander expanded their homestead over the years, adding a barn and a proper chicken coop, clearing land for a garden. They raised cattle and sold furs, made trips to Malad City for supplies and to visit their friends. It was a simple life, a hard life, but it was theirs. On their 7th wedding anniversary, Xander took Sarah back to the spot where they had first met, where she had collapsed at the edge of his half-built cabin. So much had changed since that day. The cabin was finished now, expanded, a real home. The forest had been pushed back, replaced by cultivated land. And Sarah herself was different, no longer the frightened, broken woman who had fled into the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked as they stood together in the dappled sunlight. "Staying here, marrying me, choosing this life?" Sarah turned to look at him, at the man who had saved her in every way that mattered, who had shown her what love was supposed to be. His hair had a few strands of silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the strongest, most capable man she had ever known. "Not for a single second," she said honestly. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. Safety, love, a family, a home. You gave me myself back, Xander." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood like that for a long moment, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful out of fear and desperation. "I love you," Xander murmured into her hair. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "I love you too," Sarah whispered back. From the cabin, they could hear their children's voices raised in play, and Xander smiled. "We should get back. Thomas is probably terrorizing his sisters." "Undoubtedly." Sarah took his hand, and together they walked back toward the sound of laughter, toward the life they had created together. That evening, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Sarah sat on the porch with Xander, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and fear, all the running and hiding. And she thought about how it had all led to this moment, to this man, to this life. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked, his arm around her shoulders. "How strange life is," Sarah said softly. "How something terrible can lead to something wonderful. How the worst decision I ever made, marrying Marcus, led me to the best decision I ever made, choosing you." "The world works in mysterious ways," Xander agreed. "But I am grateful for every step that brought you to me, even the hard ones." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke and him. "They said I was running from a mean-streaked husband," she murmured, remembering the telegram that had preceded her arrival, the warnings that had spread through the territory. Xander pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And I said you were running to me. Turns out we were both right." Sarah smiled in the darkness, her heart full to bursting. She had run from Marcus, yes, from his cruelty and his violence and his need to control. But she had also run toward something, even if she had not known it at the time. Toward safety, toward love, toward a future worth living. Toward Xander. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There were hard winters when the snow piled high and supplies ran low, and hot summers when the creek ran dry and they had to haul water from the spring. There were illnesses that tested their strength and losses that tested their faith. But through it all, Sarah and Xander faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. When Sarah turned 35, Xander surprised her by taking her to Malad City for a week, leaving the children in the capable hands of Mrs. Fletcher. They stayed at the boarding house where they had first fallen in love, and Xander took her dancing at the town social, and they walked hand in hand through the streets like young sweethearts. "I wanted to give you something special," Xander explained, "something to show you how much these years with you have meant to me." "You give me something special every day," Sarah said, but she was touched by the gesture nonetheless. On their last night in town, they attended a concert at the new Civic Hall. A traveling singer had come through, and the whole town turned out to hear her perform. Sarah sat transfixed, listening to the woman's clear, beautiful voice fill the hall, and felt a stirring of something she had not felt in years. After the concert, as they walked back to the boarding house, Xander looked at her thoughtfully. "You used to sing, did you not? In church?" "A lifetime ago," Sarah said wistfully. "I have not sung in public since before I married Marcus." "Maybe it is time to start again." Xander stopped walking and turned to face her. "Pastor Williams has been after me to convince you to join the church choir. Says they desperately need a soprano." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. "I do not know if I remember how." "You sing to the children every night. I hear you in the kitchen, humming while you work. Your voice is beautiful, Sarah. You should share it." Xander took her hands. "But only if you want to. No pressure." Sarah thought about it, about the girl she had been before Marcus broke her, the one who had loved music and performing and bringing joy to others. And she thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident and free. I think I would like that," she said slowly. "Yes? I think I would like to sing again." So she joined the church choir, and on Sunday mornings her voice soared through the small wooden church, filling the space with beauty. Xander would sit in the front pew with their children, watching her with such obvious pride and love that it made her heart sing even louder. Music became a part of their lives again. Sarah taught the children songs, and on quiet evenings, Xander would play the harmonica he had learned as a boy, and they would all sing together, their voices blending in harmony. It was a small thing, but it felt like reclaiming another piece of herself, another victory over the darkness Marcus had tried to impose on her life. When James turned 12, he started asking questions about Sarah's past, about why they never visited his maternal grandparents in Wyoming, about the mother's maiden name she used instead of her married name on all the documents. Sarah and Xander had known this conversation was coming, had prepared for it, but it was still difficult to find the right words. They sat him down one evening after his sisters had gone to bed, and Sarah told him the truth. Not all the gory details, but enough for him to understand. That she had been married before, to a man who hurt her. That she had run away to save her own life and had found his father, who had protected her and loved her and given her a new beginning. James listened solently, his young face serious. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Xander and said, "So you saved her, like a hero in a story." Xander shook his head. "No, son. Your mother saved herself. She was the one who had the courage to run, to fight for her own life. I just helped her along the way." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected gently. "Your father was alone in these mountains, hurting from his own losses. We healed each other, built a life together. That is what love does, James. It makes both people stronger." James nodded, processing this. "Is that man the bad one? Is he still out there?" "Probably," Sarah said honestly. "But he has no power over us anymore. He cannot hurt us, cannot take away what we have built. And if he ever tried, well, your father and I would face it together, just like we face everything else." That seemed to satisfy James, and he hugged them both before heading to bed. Sarah watched him go, her heart full of gratitude for this life, for these children who would never know the fear she had lived with for so long. "You did good," Xander said, pulling her close. "He needed to know the truth, and you told it to him in a way he could understand." "He's growing up so fast," Sarah murmured. "All of them are. Time moves on. That is the way of things." Xander kissed her temple. "But we move with it, together." Together. That word had become Sarah's touchstone, her promise, her prayer. Whatever came, they would face it together. The news reached them in the winter of 1896, when Sarah was 41 and Xander was 48. Charles Whitman, now a distinguished judge himself, sent a telegram. Marcus Dalton was dead, killed in a riding accident on his ranch in Wyoming. Sarah read the telegram twice, trying to understand what she felt. Not grief, certainly. Not joy either, exactly. More like closure, the final severing of a thread that had tied her to a painful past. "How do you feel?" Xander asked gently, reading over her shoulder. "Free," Sarah said after a moment. "Completely, utterly free. For 12 years I've been free in practice, but there was always a part of me that feared he might find a way to come after us, to hurt our children, to punish me. Now that fear is gone forever." Xander wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Then we should celebrate, not his death, but your freedom, your victory." They did celebrate, in their own quiet way. They made love that night with a tenderness and passion undiminished by the years, and Sarah felt as if she had finally, completely left the past behind. The children grew into strong, capable adults. James became a rancher like his father, building his own homestead just over the ridge from theirs. Margaret married a teacher and moved to Boise, where she started her own school. Thomas, the youngest, decided to become a doctor, driven by his desire to help people the way his mother had been helped. Sarah and Xander grew older together, their hair turning silver, their bodies showing the marks of a life lived fully and hard in the mountains, but their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, rooted in a foundation of shared trials and triumphs. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the cabin. The whole community came, all the people whose lives Sarah and Xander had touched over the years. There was food and music and dancing, and Sarah sang for them, her voice still clear and true. As the sun set and their guests began to depart, Sarah and Xander stood on the porch of the cabin he had built for her all those years ago, watching their grandchildren play in the meadow. "Do you remember the first day we met?" Xander asked, his arm around her waist. "Every detail," Sarah said. "I thought you were the most terrifying man I had ever seen, so big, so wild-looking." Xander laughed. "And now? Now I know you are the gentlest man I have ever known, the kindest, the most loving." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me everything, Xander. A home, a family, a life worth living. How do I ever thank you for that?" "You already have." Xander cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle now as it had been that first day when he caught her falling. "You loved me. You built this life with me. You gave me children and grandchildren and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. That is all the thanks I will ever need." They kissed as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains gold, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had created something bright and beautiful and lasting. The years continued to unfold, bringing new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Sarah and Xander slowed down, as was natural, but they never stopped caring for each other, never stopped finding joy in the simple act of being together. Sarah passed away first at the age of 67, peacefully in her sleep with Xander holding her hand. She had lived long enough to see all her children settled and happy, to hold her great-granddaughter, to know that the legacy she left behind was one of love and strength and courage. Xander followed her 2 years later, his heart giving out one quiet morning as he sat on the porch of the cabin they had shared for so long. He was 76, and his last words, whispered to James who had come to visit, were, "Tell your mother I am coming to her. Tell her I kept my promise. I cherished her every day." They were buried side by side in a small cemetery outside Malad City, beneath a pair of pine trees that had grown together, their branches intertwined. The headstone bore simple words: Xander Prescott, 1847–1923. Beloved husband and father Sarah Prescott, 1862–1929. Beloved wife and mother together. Always, but their real legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren who carried their stories, in the cabin that still stood in the mountains, and in the example they had set of what love could be when it was freely given and gratefully received. Sarah had run from a mean-streaked husband, yes, but she had run to something far greater, a love that healed, a partnership that strengthened, and a life that proved that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest endings. And in the end, that was the story that mattered. Not the running, but the finding. Not the fear, but the courage. Not the man who tried to break her, but the man who helped her become whole. She ran to him, and in doing so, she ran to herself, to the woman she was always meant to be, free, loved, and home at last.